What if I told you that Ford and GM's record-breaking 2024 sales are hiding a secret, one that could change the entire car market forever? These two automotive giants reported their best sales since 2019, a headline that sounds like great news, but dig deeper and you'll find a different story. Why are dealerships flooded with unsold cars? How are EVs creating more problems than solutions? And what does this chaos mean for you? What's happening? Record sales numbers for Ford and GM in 2024. Proof the car market is thriving, right? Wrong. The truth is far more complicated. It's easy to get swept away by headlines proclaiming record-breaking sales volumes. After all, numbers don't lie, do they? Ford and General Motors, two of the biggest names in the automotive world, reported their highest sales since 2019, reaching levels unseen in years. But here's where it gets interesting. These numbers, though impressive on the surface, mask a troubling reality about the state of the automotive industry. Let's rewind for context. Back in 2019, the car market was in full swing. There was no pandemic, no supply chain crisis, and no looming specter of economic downturn. So when Ford and GM boasted about reaching pre-pandemic levels in 2024, it seemed like the industry was back on track. But these figures tell only half the story. Digging deeper reveals that while sales volumes rose, they didn't rise proportionately to the number of vehicles produced. Ford and GM have been pumping out cars at a record pace, more cars than the market can absorb. So why the rush to produce? The answer lies in shareholder optics. By inflating production numbers and reporting strong sales, automakers can maintain the illusion of stability, keeping investors happy. But when the curtain is pulled back, a different picture emerges, one that's far from the rosy narrative presented in press releases. And this is just the beginning. Wait until you see how overproduction has created a ticking time bomb for the industry. Now, let's talk about the numbers behind this production surge and why it's causing more harm than good. The production paradox. What happens when you make more cars than you sell? Ford and GM are finding out the hard way. Overproduction might sound like a win. It means more options for consumers, right? But in reality, it's a symptom of deeper problems in the industry. In 2024, Ford and GM ramped up production by roughly 7% compared to the previous year. On paper, that might seem reasonable, but here's the catch. Their sales only grew by about 4%. This gap between production and sales isn't just a minor oversight, it's a glaring inefficiency. As a result, dealerships across the United States are bursting at the seams with inventory. Rows of shiny, unsold vehicles sit in secondary and even third-tier lots, waiting for buyers who may never come. And it's not just a small-scale issue. We're talking about 3 million brand new cars currently available in the US, an increase of over 120% compared to just 2.5 years ago. Here's the kicker. These production surges aren't driven by market demand. Instead, they're a deliberate attempt to make sales figures look more impressive than they actually are. Imagine this: if you own a bakery and bake 250,000 more donuts this year than last, would you expect to sell more donuts? The answer might seem obvious, but the reality is more nuanced. In the automotive world, production doesn't necessarily translate to demand. And this overproduction doesn't just create inventory problems, it's triggering a race to the bottom in pricing strategies. Let's dive into the dramatic discounts dealerships are offering to clear their lots, and why it's a double-edged sword. The fire sale frenzy. What would you say if I told you dealerships were selling cars at a loss? It's happening, and it's more common than you think. As the inventory glut grows, dealerships have been forced to take drastic measures to move metal off their lots. In late 2024, it became alarmingly common to see discounts of $8,000 to $12,000 on high-ticket vehicles like pickup trucks, models that rarely see such markdowns. Even more surprising are the incentivized financing deals: 0% interest over 60 months or 1.9% over 72 months. These offers sound great for buyers, but they reveal just how desperate dealerships have become. But here's the problem. Selling cars at a loss isn't sustainable. Dealerships operate on slim profit margins, relying on steady sales and manageable inventory levels to stay afloat. When forced to slash prices below invoice just to clear space, they lose the ability to generate profit. In fact, many dealerships reported operating at a loss for months on end in 2024, a phenomenon practically unheard of in previous years. The root cause of this fire sale frenzy isn't just overproduction, it's also a sign of shifting consumer priorities. Buyers are holding out for better deals or avoiding big-ticket purchases altogether due to economic uncertainty. This has left dealerships with no choice but to turn to extreme discounts and promotions, creating a vicious cycle that eats away at profitability and damages the perception of their product's value. And yet, these discounts haven't solved the problem. They've only delayed the inevitable. So, what does all of this mean for Ford and GM's long-term prospects? Let's explore the broader consequences of their short-term strategies. The cost of desperation. How do desperate moves today impact a company's future? Ford and GM might be learning the hard way. The long-term effects of these desperate sales tactics extend far beyond dealership lots. Selling vehicles at steep discounts not only erodes profit margins, but also sets a dangerous precedent. Once consumers get used to massive markdowns and low-interest financing, it becomes difficult to reset expectations. Why would a buyer pay full price for a new car when they've seen the same model discounted by thousands just a few months earlier? Moreover, this desperation is straining relationships between manufacturers and dealerships. Ford and GM rely heavily on their dealer networks to maintain market presence, but dealers are growing increasingly frustrated with the unrealistic expectations placed upon them. They're expected to clear out unsold inventory while preparing to receive new shipments, often of models priced higher than ever before. This tension is further compounded by the growing shift towards electric vehicles and hybrids. While Ford and GM tout their EV growth as a success, the reality is more complicated. Incentivized sales and government subsidies are propping up EV numbers, but dealership profits remain minimal. In some cases, selling an EV barely covers the cost of keeping it on the lot, and the ripple effects of these cracks could shape the future of the automotive market in ways we've never seen before. If you're finding this insightful, don't forget to like this video. It helps us keep bringing you the latest analysis. The EV gamble. Ford and GM are betting big on EVs, but what if this gamble is less about innovation and more about survival? Electric vehicles have been touted as the future of the automotive industry, a cleaner, greener alternative to gas guzzlers. Ford and GM are all in, reporting significant increases in EV sales for 2024. Ford, for instance, boasted a 38% growth in EV sales compared to the previous year. Sounds impressive, right? But when you peel back the layers, the reality of this so-called EV boom is far less rosy. The rise in EV sales isn't a result of overwhelming consumer demand. Instead, it's being driven by a combination of aggressive marketing, government subsidies, and dealer incentives. Imagine walking into a dealership and finding a brand new electric vehicle with 0% interest over 60 months and thousands of dollars in tax credits. For many buyers, it's a no-brainer, but for Ford and GM, it's a financial tightrope. Every EV sold at these heavily discounted rates represents a loss, a hit to the bottom line that they can't afford to take indefinitely. Then there's the issue of adoption. EVs may be growing in numbers, but they're far from mainstream. Charging infrastructure remains a significant barrier, especially in rural areas where many of Ford and GM's most loyal customers reside. The convenience of traditional gas-powered vehicles is hard to beat, and until EVs can match that convenience, their market penetration will remain limited. The real gamble lies in how Ford and GM are positioning EVs. By pouring billions into development and production, they're banking on a rapid shift in consumer behavior. But what happens if that shift doesn't occur as quickly as expected? With competitors like Tesla already dominating the market, Ford and GM face an uphill battle to carve out their own space. While Ford and GM fight for a slice of the EV market, they're also grappling with a formidable competitor who's rewriting the rules: Tesla. The Tesla effect. Tesla isn't just another competitor, it's a disruptor that's forcing the entire industry to play catch-up. In the world of EVs, Tesla is king. While Ford and GM are racing to establish themselves in the electric market, Tesla has been dominating for years. The company's first-mover advantage, combined with its ability to innovate at lightning speed, has left legacy automakers scrambling to catch up. But Tesla's success isn't just about technology, it's about perception. Tesla isn't just selling cars, it's selling a vision of the future. For many buyers, owning a Tesla is as much about the brand's sleek design and cutting-edge features as it is about reducing their carbon footprint. Ford and GM, on the other hand, are still seen primarily as traditional automakers, struggling to shake off their decades-old image. This perception gap is critical. Consumers associate Tesla with innovation and leadership in the EV space, while Ford and GM are often viewed as playing catch-up. Even when Ford's Mustang Mach-E or GM's Chevy Bolt make headlines, they're frequently compared to Tesla's offerings, and not always favorably. Then there's pricing. Tesla's aggressive pricing strategies have forced the rest of the industry into a race to the bottom. By slashing prices on their models, Tesla has created immense pressure on competitors to do the same, cutting into already razor-thin profit margins. For Ford and GM, this has been particularly challenging, as they don't have the same economies of scale or brand loyalty that Tesla enjoys. And here's where it gets even more complicated. While Tesla thrives, hybrids are emerging as a new battleground. Hybrids were supposed to be the bridge to EVs, but are they delivering on their promise? The hybrid dilemma. Hybrids were the golden ticket to transition consumers to EVs, but is that strategy working? For years, hybrids have been marketed as the perfect middle ground, a stepping stone for consumers hesitant to go all in on electric vehicles. Ford and GM have both leaned into this strategy, producing hybrid versions of popular models, the F-150 and the Chevy Silverado. On paper, it's a logical move. Hybrids offer better fuel efficiency than traditional vehicles without the range anxiety of full EVs. But here's the dilemma. Hybrids are starting to feel like a compromise that satisfies no one. For consumers ready to embrace EVs, hybrids seem like a half measure. For those clinging to their gas-powered vehicles, hybrids don't offer enough to justify the higher price tag. This leaves hybrids stuck in a sort of limbo, appealing to a shrinking subset of buyers. The numbers back this up. While Ford and GM report growth in their hybrid segments, it pales in comparison to the sales of traditional vehicles and even EVs. And hybrids come with their own set of challenges, including higher production costs and a more complex supply chain. Batteries, electric motors, and internal combustion engines all have to coexist in a single vehicle, driving up manufacturing complexity. There's also the issue of competition. Toyota, the pioneer of hybrid technology, continues to dominate this space with models like the Prius and the RAV4 hybrid. For Ford and GM, breaking into this well-established market has been an uphill battle, with most of their hybrid offerings struggling to gain significant traction. And as hybrids struggle to find their footing, the pressure on Ford and GM to innovate elsewhere is only intensifying. But the challenges don't stop at hybrid and EV sales. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the supply chain crisis. The supply chain squeeze. What's really driving the automotive crisis? It's not just sales or production, it's the supply chain. The supply chain issues plaguing the automotive industry are more than just a temporary setback. They're a systemic problem that's reshaping how cars are made and sold. Ford and GM, like most automakers, rely on a complex web of suppliers to produce their vehicles. When one link in that chain falters, the entire system can grind to a halt. In 2024, supply chain disruptions continued to wreak havoc, with shortages of critical components like semiconductors leading to production delays and skyrocketing costs. For Ford and GM, this meant scrambling to secure materials while managing the rising expenses of labor, transportation, and raw materials. But the challenges don't end there. As the push for EVs grows, so does the demand for lithium, cobalt, and other materials essential for battery production. The competition for these resources is fierce, driving prices higher and creating new dependencies on overseas suppliers. This has forced automakers to rethink their supply chains entirely, with many investing in domestic production facilities to reduce reliance on foreign sources. Despite these efforts, the supply chain remains a fragile and unpredictable factor in Ford and GM's operations. Delays in one area can cascade across the entire production process, leading to missed targets, unsatisfied customers, and financial losses. For dealerships, the supply chain crisis has added another layer of complexity. Inventory levels fluctuate unpredictably, leaving dealers unsure of when or how many vehicles they'll receive. This unpredictability makes it even harder to plan sales strategies, compounding the challenges already posed by overproduction and weak demand. And this supply chain squeeze isn't just a logistical problem, it's reshaping the entire business model of the automotive industry. If you thought this was complex, wait until you see how these dynamics are impacting dealers and customers. If you're enjoying this deep dive, consider sharing this video with friends who'd find it useful. It helps us spread the word. Layoffs and mergers. If the automotive industry is booming, why are so many workers being shown the door? The answer is more revealing than you might think. Beneath the surface of record-breaking sales and optimistic press releases lies a harsh reality. Ford and GM, along with other automakers, are shedding jobs at an alarming rate. In 2024 alone, Ford and GM collectively laid off thousands of workers, citing market realignments and cost-cutting measures as reasons. For a supposedly thriving industry, this move raises serious questions. Why are these layoffs happening now? The root cause lies in overproduction and shrinking profit margins. Automakers find themselves in in a paradoxical situation. They're making and selling more vehicles than ever, but they're doing so at unsustainable discounts and razor-thin margins. To offset these financial pressures, companies have turned to workforce reductions as a way to cut costs. Then there's the issue of automation. As production facilities adopt more advanced technologies, many roles traditionally filled by human workers are becoming redundant. While this shift might improve efficiency, it's creating a growing divide between automakers and their employees. The fallout isn't limited to layoffs. Desperation in the industry has led to unusual partnerships and even mergers. One of the most shocking developments in 2024 was Nissan's merger with Honda, a last-ditch effort for survival. For years, both companies had struggled to keep up with competitors, and this merger marked a dramatic shift in the industry's landscape. These moves signal deeper instability in the automotive market. Companies are making dramatic decisions not because they're thriving, but because they're trying to stave off collapse. And this wave of layoffs and mergers is just the beginning. Some automakers are experiencing their worst years in decades. Let's take a closer look at Stellantis and how their struggles mirror the broader challenges facing the industry. The Stellantis collapse. 15% fewer sales in 1 year. What happened to Stellantis, and could Ford and GM be next? Stellantis, the multinational giant behind brands like Jeep, Dodge, and Chrysler, entered 2024 on shaky ground. By the end of the year, the company reported its worst sales figures since 2010, with a staggering 15% decline compared to 2023. What went wrong? The answer lies in a combination of factors, many of which are shared by Ford and GM. First, Stellantis struggled with overproduction. Much like its competitors, the company flooded the market with vehicles, hoping to boost sales numbers. Instead, dealerships were left with unsold inventory piling up on their lots. Second, Stellantis failed to adapt to changing consumer preferences. While the company invested heavily in SUVs and trucks, it lagged behind in the EV market. In an era where electrification is rapidly gaining momentum, Stellantis' lineup felt dated, leaving them vulnerable to competitors like Tesla, Hyundai, and even Ford. Finally, Stellantis faced significant internal challenges. Leadership instability, supply chain disruptions, and rising costs created a perfect storm that eroded the company's market share. By the end of 2024, Stellantis was no longer seen as a serious contender in the race for innovation. What makes Stellantis' struggles so concerning is how closely they mirror the broader challenges facing Ford and GM. If these giants don't learn from Stellantis' mistakes, they could find themselves on a similar trajectory, and the parallels don't stop there. Let's dive into how leadership plays a critical role in shaping an automaker's fate. From production missteps to strategic decisions, leadership is at the heart of the automotive crisis. Let's explore what's happening at Ford and GM. Leadership in crisis. Are Ford and GM CEOs steering the ship, or are they simply trying to keep it afloat? Leadership during a crisis can make or break a company, and for Ford and GM, the stakes have never been higher. Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, and Mary Barra, CEO of GM, have faced immense pressure to navigate their companies through turbulent waters. Their decisions, however, have sparked both praise and criticism. Farley has been outspoken about Ford's commitment to electrification, pushing initiatives like the Mustang Mach-E and F-150 Lightning. While these moves signal progress, critics argue that Farley's focus on premium pricing alienates Ford's core audience, buyers who value affordability and reliability. The tension between catering to traditional customers and chasing future markets has left Ford in a precarious position. Meanwhile, Barra has positioned GM as a leader in EV technology, with ambitious plans to phase out internal combustion engines by 2035. While this vision aligns with global trends, GM's execution has been uneven. Recurring recalls, production delays, and quality issues have undermined consumer confidence, tarnishing GM's reputation as a reliable automaker. Both leaders face a fundamental challenge: how to balance short-term profitability with long-term innovation. Striking this balance is no small feat, especially in an industry undergoing such rapid transformation. And as leadership grapples with these challenges, the ripple effects are being felt most acutely by consumers. Let's shift gears and examine how these issues are impacting the very people automakers depend on: the buyers. The consumer backlash. What happens when customers lose trust? Ford and GM are finding out the hard way. The automotive industry has always relied on trust. Consumers need to believe that the vehicles they're buying are worth their hard-earned money, but for Ford and GM, that trust is starting to erode. One major source of frustration is pricing. Consumers are increasingly wary of the high price tags attached to many new models, particularly EVs. Take Ford's F-150 Lightning, for example. While it's packed with cutting-edge features, its nearly $90,000 price tag puts it out of reach for most buyers. Even with discounts and incentives, many consumers feel these vehicles simply aren't worth the investment. Reliability is another sore spot. Recalls have become alarmingly common, raising questions about quality control. For buyers, the inconvenience and cost associated with repairs can quickly overshadow the excitement of owning a new vehicle. Then there's the issue of availability. While dealerships are flooded with inventory, many popular models remain hard to find, creating a disconnect between supply and demand. Buyers who walk into a dealership expecting options often leave frustrated, unable to find the vehicle they want. This growing dissatisfaction has real consequences. Negative word of mouth spreads quickly, deterring potential buyers and further straining dealer relationships. For Ford and GM, the challenge isn't just selling cars, it's rebuilding trust with the very people who keep their businesses afloat. And this consumer backlash might just be the most dangerous challenge yet for Ford and GM, threatening their place in the market. What do you think so far? Drop a comment with your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. The EV road ahead. Can Ford and GM's ambitious EV plans save them, or are they just digging a deeper hole? Ford and GM are betting their futures on electrification, pouring billions into EV research, production, and infrastructure. On paper, the strategy is sound. Governments worldwide are tightening emissions regulations, and consumers are gradually warming up to the idea of cleaner, more efficient vehicles. But the road ahead is anything but smooth. One major hurdle is cost. Despite the hype, EVs remain expensive to produce, with battery technology being the biggest culprit. While Tesla has managed to streamline its production processes, Ford and GM are still struggling with high overheads and supply chain issues. These challenges are reflected in their pricing. For many consumers, even with subsidies and discounts, EVs from Ford and GM feel out of reach. Infrastructure is another bottleneck. While urban areas are beginning to see an increase in charging stations, rural regions, where many Ford and GM customers reside, remain underserved. Without reliable charging networks, even the most innovative EVs can't overcome the anxiety of running out of power mid-trip. And then there's the question of differentiation. Tesla has built a brand synonymous with EV innovation, while competitors like Rivian and Lucid are carving out niches in luxury and adventure-focused electric vehicles. Ford and GM, despite their efforts, are struggling to stand out in an increasingly crowded market. And this struggle to define their place in the EV market could spell the difference between survival and irrelevance. But EVs aren't the only challenge, they're just one piece of a much larger puzzle that includes affordability, adaptability, and trust. Why it matters to you. What does this turmoil in the automotive world mean for you? More than you might expect. For consumers, the ongoing upheaval in the car market isn't just about big companies scrambling to adapt. It's about how these changes impact your wallet, your choices, and your future. Firstly, pricing. The financial pressures facing automakers mean that discounts and incentives, while common now, may not last. This creates a narrow window for savvy buyers to take advantage of deals on both traditional and electric vehicles. However, it also means that once the dust settles, prices could climb higher than ever as companies attempt to recoup their losses. Reliability is another concern. With automakers rushing to innovate, quality control is often the first casualty. Consumers need to be cautious, researching models carefully to avoid headaches down the road. Finally, the shift toward electrification means that the cars of tomorrow will be fundamentally different from what we're used to today. Whether it's navigating charging infrastructure, understanding new tax credits, or simply adapting to the feel of an EV, buyers will need to adjust their expectations and habits. And this is why staying informed matters. Knowing when and how to act could save you thousands and help you make a smarter decision. If you found this video helpful, hit subscribe to stay updated on everything shaping the car market.